This is Artifact 11, Manage Technology and Digital Platforms for Standard 6.2 ISTE Criterion 20. The standard says manage the use of technology and student learning strategies in digital platforms, virtual learning environments, hands-on makerspaces, or in the field. The goal of this standard is really to help students manage the use of technology for all students in all environments, whether digital, hands-on, virtual, or in-field. For this artifact, I chose my iTech 7485 Creative Computing project, where students had to introduce a new vertebrate that was a hybrid of multiple vertebrates, and they used the engineering design process, and they created a digital story through Scratch. In the planning of this project, there were certain questions that were asked of really making us think about how we would help our students with the use of technology and working independently in the classroom. So a few of those, we talked about how I would help the students use the computer with care while transporting them, understanding that they using two hands to transport from the charging station to their seat, making sure to take care of the keyboard, not banging on the keyboard, certain computer just usage issues. Next, I worked with the students on the computer software programs that they would use, like Google Drawings, to create their animal, as well as Scratch for their digital story. We talked about ways to abide by those copyright laws in Google Drawings, making sure that they were using images that were available for reuse, and understanding that we could not just copy and paste certain pictures for their project. We also discussed with the collaboration aspect of students being able to use Google Drawings and using discourse that we have used throughout the year of I enjoyed, I wish, and I'm curious about, to provide feedback for their peers. We also talked about ways that they can troubleshoot through their problems for their story of going through a debugging process of looking at their Scratch and seeing if they can find the error and correct that error. Lastly, we talked with students about how to use their Google Drawing and download it as a PNG file to be able to use as a sprite in their Scratch digital story. So for the planning process, I used all of those questions and then developed my section of the final project with use of technology and student learning strategies, and put that together as my artifact. This is Artifact 11, Create Opportunities that Challenge Students to be Innovative for Standard 6.3 ISTE Criterion 21. This is create learning opportunities that challenge students to use a design process and computational thinking to innovate and solve problems. The goal of this standard is to provide opportunities for students to be challenged and use computational thinking to be innovative and solve problems. This project had students thinking computationally by planning out their animal and then being able to decompose their story into different parts. So the first step, they had to design and create a animal that was a new vertebrate that would be newly discovered in the world. Once they created their animal, they then had to decompose their story into different parts, being able to have an introduction where they tell us about their newly discovered animal, have some kind of plot to the story, and then wrapping up the story with a conclusion or an ending event. Part of their pattern recognition that was used by the students was making sure to know that their animal maybe was, if it was a mammal, that the specifics of the animal had to give live birth, have warm blood, have fur or hair, and then they had to breathe with lungs. So making sure that their animal had those parts and was portrayed in their story. Once they developed their storyline, students had to use the process of abstraction to be able to filter out any information that was unnecessary or not needed to introduce their newly discovered animal. And then finally, the students had to use algorithms to be able to code their digital story in Scratch using block coding. For this artifact, I also wanted to show a student sample This is one of the student samples of their animal, their vertebrate, that is a hybrid. They named their animal a pronglida, and you can see that they had to use computational thinking to really dive into the process, think about their animal, make sure it met the qualities, and then you can see here their block coding in Scratch to do their digital story. They were able to have other characters besides their newly discovered animal, as well as be able to change scenes. They really had to work through and make sure that their story, once it began, made sense, everything worked. They had to troubleshoot and debug, and they were able to come up with their final digital story to share with their school peers as well as the community. This is Artifact 11, Model and Nurture Creativity for Standard 6.4, ISTE Criterion 22. This is model and nurture creativity and creative expression to communicate ideas, knowledge, or connection. The goal for this standard is really to model creativity and creative expressions for students. Basically showing them and modeling for them how to be creative and be able to have creative expression. To help my students and nurture that creativity that I wanted them to be able to have with this project, I first began showing them my animal that I created that was a hybrid of 3 different animals you can see here. And so this kind of gave some students an idea about mixing traits and mixing animals, but having within that constraint of it having to fit in a vertebrate category. I then showed students my animal that I created in my digital story using the block coding in Scratch with my 2 different characters of my bear and then my animal. And so this kind of allowed students to really see, okay, what were the expectations, but then allow for that creativity of them picking the background, the different characters that would be in their story, to be able to have that creative expression. I did show my students how I use Google Drawings to have the hybrid of the 3 different animals and using different components and different parts. However, I did allow students that they found that they were not being able to find pictures that really worked for their vision of their animal. And so some students took the opportunity to draw their newly discovered animal in their journal, and then we used the computer camera to be able to upload that drawing into Google Drawings to then download as a PNG file to be able to use as a sprite in their Scratch digital story. To also nurture the creativity for this project, students collaborated together in ways to receive feedback and improve their design and improve their animal and make improvements and debugging any of their digital story that were not working properly. But the students were able to collaborate together to really help each other improve and use their creativity to the best of their ability. Their digital stories turned out wonderful with their animals, and we ended up sharing them with our morning news show to be able to share with the school peers, as well as on my website, the teacher website, to be able to share with their parents and the community.